There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how many hours you worked or how little you slept. It's the exhaustion that comes from performing, from constantly updating people on your progress, from seeking validation in the form of likes, comments, reactions, and the small dopamine hits that come when someone acknowledges that you exist, that you're trying, that you're doing something with your life. You know the feeling. You post about the goal before you've done a single thing to achieve it. You tell your friends about the business idea before you've written a single line of a business plan. You announce the diet on Monday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon, when no one is asking how it's going, the motivation quietly dissolves, and you tell yourself it wasn't the right time. You tell yourself you'll try again. But deep down, something, if else, is happening, something that nobody in your feed is talking about. Something the self-help industry conveniently glosses over because it doesn't sell courses or build audiences. The truth is this: the noise you're making about your life is consuming the energy that was supposed to build it. This audiobook is not a gentle pat on the back. It is not a collection of affirmations designed to make you feel good for 18 minutes before the familiar paralysis sets back in. What you are about to hear are 10 brutal, unfiltered lessons drawn from one of the most quietly powerful ideas in modern personal development: the philosophy of focusing entirely on yourself and doing the real work in silence. These are lessons that cut the are meant to, because the cost of not hearing them, truly hearing them, isn't just another year of small progress and big announcements. The cost is your actual life, the one you keep saying you're going to build. Let's begin with the first lesson, and I want you to sit with this one, because it is the foundation on which everything else in this script rests. The moment you announce your goals to the world, your brain begins to betray you. This isn't a metaphor. This isn't motivational language. This is neuroscience. In the 1920s, a Russian psychologist named Bluma Zygarnik discovered something fascinating about how the human brain processes incomplete tasks. It keeps them active, humming in the background, almost like an open browser tab that refuses to close. This became known as the Zygarnik effect, and for decades researchers assumed this was purely a problem of unfinished business nagging at your consciousness. But more recent research took this in a direction that should alarm every person who has ever posted their New Year's resolution on social media. When you tell other people about your intentions, when you describe the goal out loud, in detail, with enthusiasm, your brain begins to treat the social acknowledgement as a form of partial completion. The goal feels more real. The identity feels more established. And the motivation to do the actual, unglamorous, invisible work begins to quietly decrease. NYU psychologist Peter Goldwitzer ran a series of studies on this exact phenomenon and published his findings in a paper that deserves far more attention than it gets. Participants who kept their intentions private were significantly more likely to persist in the behaviors required to achieve their goals than those who shared them publicly. The public announcers felt satisfied by the announcement itself. The silent workers had no such substitute. They had only the work, and so they did the work. This is the first brutal lesson. Silence is not humility. It is strategy. The person who says nothing and does everything is playing a completely different game than the person who says everything and does nothing. And the stakes of that game are not social. They are existential. Think about the most successful people, you know personally, not the ones with the biggest social media presence, but the ones who actually built something real, something lasting. A business, a skill, a body, a financial position that gives them actual freedom. Ask them when they told people about it. Most of them will tell you they didn't. They kept their head down. They worked. They let the results speak first and the story come after. This is not an accident. It is a pattern so consistent, so documented, and so consistently ignored by the wider culture that it borders on the criminal. We have built an entire economy around announcing progress, social platforms, accountability groups, vision boards shared publicly, and what we have produced is a generation of people who are exceptionally good at talking about becoming and exceptionally poor at actually becoming. The second lesson is harder to hear, and that is exactly why most people never truly absorb it. The people around you, your friends, your family, your social circle, do not actually want you to change. I want to be precise here, because this is not a cynical statement about human nature. These people may love you deeply. They may genuinely wish you well in the abstract. But there is a powerful, largely unconscious social dynamic that operates beneath all of that goodwill, and it works actively against your growth in ways that are almost invisible until you know what to look for. Social psychologists call it the social equilibrium effect. Every group, every family, every friend group, every workplace has an established hierarchy, a set of unspoken roles, an emotional arrangement that everyone has quietly agreed to. You are the funny one, or the struggling one, or the reliable one, or the one who always has a crisis. These roles provide predictability. They create a kind of social stability. And when you begin to change, when you start waking up early, cutting out alcohol, building a business, losing weight, making more money, speaking differently, you threaten that stability. and people respond to threatened stability in very human ways. They laugh at your new habits. They remind you of who you used to be. They offer you the cake. They ask why you're being so serious. They suggest that maybe you're going through something. None of this is malicious. Almost none of it is even conscious, but it is real, and if you are not insulated against it, it will work. It will pull you back. The insulation is silence. When you don't announce the goal, there is nothing to mock, nothing to discourage, nothing to wait for you to fail at. The person who changes quietly gives the social environment no target. They simply one day appear different, more disciplined, more successful, more composed, and by that point, the results are undeniable and the social reality has already shifted. This is why the most dramatic personal transformations you will ever witness always seem to happen quickly, as if overnight. They didn't happen overnight. They happened in secret, over months or years of invisible work, and then one day the dam broke and the world saw the flood all at once. The silence wasn't modesty, it was armor. Now let's talk about the third lesson, because this is where the philosophy of focusing on yourself begins to intersect with the practical realities of building something in the modern economy. We are living through one of the most disruptive economic transitions in human history. Artificial intelligence is not coming, it is here. It is already doing the work that millions of people were paid to do 5 years ago, and it is moving faster than almost any institution, policy, or individual is prepared for. In this environment, the temptation is to constantly look outward to watch what competitors are doing, to track which skills are trending, to pivot with every new wave of technology, to perform expertise in public before you have actually built it. This temptation is understandable. It is also catastrophic. The people who will thrive in the AI economy are not the ones who react fastest to every shift. They are the ones who have gone deep enough in a particular domain that they understand things no algorithm has yet been trained to replicate: nuanced context, judgment, the kind of embodied expertise that comes from years of doing something with your hands and your full attention. A freelance copywriter who spent 5 years loudly performing their way through the internet, hopping from trend to trend, announcing every new skill before they mastered any of them, will be replaced by AI before they finish reading this sentence. The freelance copywriter who spent 5 years in silence, obsessively understanding the psychology of a specific audience, mastering the craft of emotional persuasion, building genuine expertise that runs 20 meters deep rather than 20 meters wide, that person is not replaceable. They are in fact more valuable in an AI economy than they ever were before it, because what they have cannot be faked, cannot be averaged, and cannot be prompted into existence. Focus on yourself in this context means something specific. It means rejecting the scroll. It means closing the tab that shows you what every other person in your industry is doing. It means making a decision about what you are actually building, not what you should be building because it's trending, not what would look impressive to announce, but what you are willing to do in total obscurity for a year or two, because you believe in it with enough conviction to work on it without applause. That kind of conviction is increasingly rare. In a world engineered to monetize your attention, the ability to direct that attention deliberately, consistently, and quietly is one of the most powerful economic advantages a person can possess. The fourth lesson is about comparison, and I want to address this not with the usual softness but with the bluntness it deserves. Comparison is not just a distraction. Comparison is a parasite. It feeds on your attention, produces no nutrition, and leaves you weaker every time you indulge it. Social media has taken what was always a human tendency and turned it into an industrial-scale addiction. And the result is a generation of people who are objectively more educated, more connected, more resourced, and more aware of opportunity than any generation in history, and yet profoundly unsure of themselves, chronically dissatisfied, and stuck in a loop of measuring their insides against everyone else's outsides. Here is what comparison does mechanically. When you compare yourself to someone else, your brain is performing a relative evaluation. You are judging your own worth, progress, and potential not against your own capacity or your own goals, but against a curated, selective, often entirely misleading representation of someone else's life. You are not seeing their 5 a.m. mornings. You are not seeing their rejections. You are not seeing the version of their business plan that failed twice before the third one worked. You are seeing the highlight reel. And your brain, which is not built to distinguish between the highlight reel and reality, processes this as a genuine data point about where you stand. The inevitable conclusion is that you are behind. And because you feel behind, you rush. And because you rush, you cut corners. And because you cut corners, you produce work that is not your best work, that doesn't reflect what you're actually capable of when you're running your own race at your own pace toward your own finish line. The antidote is not gratitude journaling, though that doesn't hurt. The antidote is radical redirection. Every minute you spend looking sideways is a minute you are not looking forward. And in the compounding arithmetic of a career or a life, those minutes are not trivial. A person who spends 1 hour less per day in the comparative loop and redirects that hour toward building their actual craft or business will over the course of a decade, accumulate thousands of hours of deliberate practice that their peers simply do not have. That gap will show. It always shows. The question is only whether you want to be on the widening or the narrowing side of it. The fifth lesson cuts deepest. And I know because it is the one most people resist most fiercely when they first encounter it. The story you tell yourself about why you are not yet where you want to be is the most sophisticated obstacle between you and the life you claim to want. This is not about mindset in the pop psychology sense of just thinking positive thoughts. This is about something far more structural, the way human beings construct narratives to protect themselves from the discomfort of full responsibility. You are busy. You don't have the resources. You didn't have the right start. The economy is broken. The algorithm is unfair. Your family needs you. Your health hasn't cooperated. Your city doesn't have the opportunities that other cities have. I am not dismissing any of these as unreal. Some of them are genuinely difficult circumstances. And the idea that all obstacles are merely mental is not only false but insulting. Two people who face structural disadvantages that are entirely outside their control. But here's the brutal truth that lives alongside those real circumstances. The story you tell, and more importantly, the story you rehearse, over and over, to yourself and to others, becomes the operating system of your behavior. And when that story centers on external causes for internal results, it systematically removes your agency. It makes you a spectator in your own life. And spectators do not build things. The person who says, I'm going to build this despite the circumstances, in silence, without waiting for the conditions to be perfect or for others to validate the attempt, that person has made a decision about who holds the pen in their story. They have chosen authorship over spectatorship, and what follows from that choice is not magic. It is simply a different quality of action, more consistent, more grounded, more resilient to the inevitable setbacks. Because the setbacks no longer confirm the story that the world is against you. They become data. They become course corrections. They become part of the process rather than proof of its futility. There was a young man I want to tell you about. I'll call him Marcus, though the details are composited from several people whose stories I have followed closely. Marcus grew up in a neighborhood where the visible ceiling on ambition was low. Most of the people around him were working jobs they had not chosen and would not choose, doing them because survival required it and because no one in their immediate environment had ever modeled a different path. Marcus had every legitimate reason to write the same story for himself. Instead, he did something unusual. He stopped talking about what he wanted and started doing it. He spent 2 years learning software development at night, after long shifts at a warehouse, in almost complete silence. He didn't post about it. He didn't announce it. He didn't join accountability groups or share his progress on LinkedIn. Which just worked. And then one day he had a portfolio. And then one day he had a remote job that paid more in a month than the warehouse paid in 3. And the people around him who had gently mocked the ambition they didn't know about until it succeeded were left trying to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the one standing in front of them. That reconciliation is always uncomfortable for the observer. It is almost always freeing for the person who did the silent work. The sixth lesson is about energy management, and this is an area where the conventional productivity discourse consistently gets it wrong. Most conversations about getting more done focus on time management, calendars, schedules, time blocks, morning routines. Time is treated as the primary resource, but time is a poor proxy for the resource that actually determines output quality. That resource is energy. Specifically, it is cognitive and emotional energy, the capacity for deep, focused, creative, and sustained mental work. And that energy is finite in ways that time is not. You can manufacture more hours in a day through discipline and sacrifice. You cannot manufacture more cognitive energy beyond a certain threshold. What you can do is stop wasting it. Here is where the silence philosophy becomes ruthlessly practical. Every social interaction that does not serve your growth costs cognitive energy. Every explanation you give about what you're building costs cognitive energy. Every person who questions your direction and whom you engage in a debate about your choices costs cognitive energy. Every notification, every comment, every comparison scroll costs cognitive energy. Most people are operating at 50 to 60% of their cognitive capacity before the actual work of the day begins, because they have already spent the rest performing, defending, explaining, and reacting. The person who is ruthlessly protective of their attention and energy, who has stopped trying to convince others, stopped seeking validation, stopped announcing and defending, that person walks into their work with a full tank. And the difference in output between a full tank and a half tank, sustained over months, is not incremental, it's transformational. The seventh lesson is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all, and it is the one that most directly challenges the narrative of our cultural moment. Confidence. Real confidence. Not the performed bravado of someone who needs external affirmation, but the quiet, grounded certainty of someone who knows what they are capable of, does not come from how many people believe in you. It comes from a specific relationship with yourself, built through one mechanism and one mechanism only: keeping the promises you make to yourself when no one is watching. This is the interior architecture of self-respect, and it is built brick by brick through small, private acts of integrity. You said you would wake at 6 a.m. You did. You said you would write 500 words. You did. You said you would not check your phone before noon. You didn't. These acts feel trivial in isolation. Accumulated over months, they create something that no amount of external validation can create: a deep, embodied trust in yourself, a knowledge, not a belief, that you are someone who follows through. And when you have that knowledge about yourself, the opinions of others lose their grip. You are no longer seeking confirmation from the outside because you have already confirmed something far more important on the inside. The opposite process is equally reliable and equally catastrophic. Every time you break a promise to yourself, every time you announce the goal and don't pursue it, every time you say one thing to the world and do another in private, you are making a deposit in a different account, an account of self-doubt, an account of evidence that you cannot be trusted, even by yourself. And when that account is full, the paralysis is total. Not because the world has judged you, but because you have already judged yourself and found yourself wanting. This is why the silence matters, not just strategically but psychologically. When you stop announcing what you're going to do and simply do it, you remove the gap between word and action. There is no public commitment to maintain, no performance to sustain, no audience to disappoint. There is only you, the work, and the steadily growing account of private integrity. And that account, when it reaches a certain balance, produces a quality of quiet confidence that is magnetic, that is undeniable, and that no amount of personal branding or public performance can replicate. The eighth lesson is about the long game, and I want to spend meaningful time here because the short-termism of modern culture is one of the most insidious and least discussed forms of self-sabotage affecting people today. We live in an era of instant gratification so comprehensive that it has fundamentally altered our expectations about how quickly things should happen. A post should go viral within hours. A business should generate revenue within weeks. A skill should produce results within months. And when these expectations are not met, as they almost never are, the conclusion is not that the timeline was wrong. The conclusion is that the goal is wrong, or the approach is wrong, or the person is wrong. And so the pivot begins. A new direction, a new announcement, a new beginning, followed eventually by the same disillusionment, the same pivot, the same endless loop of initiated and abandoned projects. The philosophy of working in silence is, at its core, a philosophy of the long game. It requires a willingness to build something without the social proof that you are building it, without the validation that it is working, without the external signals that you're on the right track. It requires a tolerance for ambiguity, for invisibility, for the long stretches where nothing seems to be happening but everything is actually compounding. Trees don't make noise when their roots are growing. Rivers don't announce their depth. The most consequential processes in nature and in human endeavor are almost always the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the ones that are already well underway by the time anyone notices them at all. There is a principle in investing called the compound interest effect, the idea that growth applied to a base over time produces returns that are initially modest and eventually explosive. Investors who understand this principle do not panic when the returns are small in the early years. They do not abandon the position because it hasn't yet delivered dramatic results. They trust the mechanism, and eventually the mechanism delivers in a way that makes the holding worth every uncertain day. The same principle applies to skills, to businesses, to physical health, to relationships, to any domain where consistent, sustained effort produces compounding returns. The person who understands this and acts accordingly, who works in silence for 2 years on something that looks invisible to the world, will eventually produce results that seem, to observers, to have appeared suddenly and effortlessly. They didn't. They compounded. The ninth lesson is about what you do with the discomfort, because discomfort is not an obstacle on the path of this kind of disciplined, silent self-development. It is the path, and how you respond to it will determine nearly everything about what you ultimately build. There is a specific type of discomfort that comes with silence and solitude and focused work that most people in the modern era are almost entirely unprepared for. It is not the discomfort of physical pain or social rejection or financial stress, though all of those appear on the road as well. It is the discomfort of being alone with your own mind without the constant mediation of entertainment, social feedback, and external stimulation. It is the discomfort of sitting with an unfinished idea and not immediately outsourcing the discomfort to a conversation, a scroll, a distraction. Most people, when they encounter this discomfort, interpret it as a sign that they are doing something wrong. They feel restless, they feel bored, they feel uncertain, and they reach for the nearest available relief, the phone, the conversation, the announcement, and the deep work stops. But here's what the discomfort actually signals when you learn to read it accurately. It signals depth. It signals that you are in the territory where the interesting, difficult, and genuinely valuable work lives. The shallow work is always comfortable because it asks nothing of you that you haven't already given. The deep work is uncomfortable, precisely because it requires you to go further than you have gone before, to hold an idea in your mind without resolving it prematurely, to sit with uncertainty long enough for something new to emerge from it. Every breakthrough in creativity, in problem-solving, in self-understanding, lives on the other side of that discomfort, not far on the other side, right on the other side. The person who has learned to stay in the discomfort for 5 more minutes than they want to, consistently, every day. What is a person who has access to a category of work and insight that the comfort seekers simply cannot reach? The 10th and final lesson is the one that ties all the others together, and I want to deliver it with the weight it deserves, because it is the lesson that most profoundly separates the people who will use what they've heard in this audiobook from the people who will enjoy it for 40 minutes and then return to exactly the life they were already living. The version of you that is possible, the disciplined, focused, quietly building, deeply capable, genuinely free version of you already exists. It is not a future self waiting to be created from scratch. It is a current self waiting to be excavated from beneath the noise, the performance, the comparison, the half-started projects, the announced and abandoned goals, the energy wasted on defending and explaining and seeking. That person is in there. They were in there before you started performing, before you began measuring yourself against others, before the culture convinced you that visibility was the same thing as progress and that the announcement was the same thing as the achievement. And the question this audiobook leaves you with is not whether you are capable of becoming that person. The question is whether you are willing to do what it takes to stop explaining yourself to people who are not building anything, to stop announcing what you are going to do and simply do it, to spend the next 6 months in a kind of deliberate, strategic, unapologetic silence, not the silence of resignation, not the silence of giving up, but the silence of someone who has decided that the work is too important and a life too short to waste on performance. Because here's the truth that you need to carry with you. When this audiobook ends and the real world reasserts itself with all of its noise and urgency and social pull, the people who will regret their lives most deeply are almost never the ones who risked too much, built too boldly, or worked too quietly. They are the ones who played it safe, who performed instead of produced, who talked when they should have worked and scrolled when they should have built. They are the ones who reached the end of a decade and found that the announcements outnumbered the achievements, that the image they curated bore no relationship to the life they actually lived, that the validation they chased never filled the void it was supposed to fill.